Welcome, everyone, to this exciting event, Deeper Science, Deeper Faith, a launch of the Integrate curriculum. It has been on our minds for years at BioLogos, and we are delighted to announce that it is launched and available for use. You're going to learn a lot about the Integrate curriculum during this hour from the people who wrote it. But before we get to that, I just wanted to say the Integrate curriculum exemplifies who we are at BioLogos. It brings together Christ-centered faith with rigorous science, God's Word and God's world. And so often in our culture today, these things are seen to be on opposite sides. And so many of our young people have picked up that impression. And for those of you who are parents and teachers or in any way working with the next generation, you know how important it is to equip them to deal with the incredibly complex issues facing our world today. And that's what this curriculum does. It comes alongside parents and teachers to do just that. It equips the next generation of leaders to be informed and faithful and gracious, able to have good conversations about these topics. So many conversations in our world are fraught with strife, with misinformation, overstatements, a desire to do what's right, but then confusion over what that is. And the Integrate curriculum comes alongside people to help our students work through those questions. So we are excited to have with us Philip Vischer, creator of Veggietales, very excited, and Francis Collins, world-class biologist. And you're going to meet some of them. You're also going to meet some of the authors of the curriculum. And I especially want to thank them. This is an incredible team. They are biologists, teachers, homeschool parents, Christian school teachers who have worked tirelessly over the last 5 years to bring together this incredibly rich curriculum. So the authors are April Cordero, Sarah Bodville-Rules, Diane Sweeney, Christy Hemphill, Kendra Terpstruck, and the project director, Catherine Applegate. And they have done an incredible job. A lot of other people contributed to this curriculum. The large team of educators who piloted it, a lot of Christian school teachers, a lot of homeschool parents, and they made sure that this curriculum is pedagogically effective and easy to use. There was also a large team of experts, distinguished scientists and theologians, pastors, who worked to make sure all the units are scientifically accurate, biblically orthodox, and pastorally sensitive. Finally, I want to thank all of our funders who made this curriculum possible. There are many generous individuals. We also had generous grants from the John Templeton Foundation and from the Blankenmeyer Foundation. So we're really grateful to our funders for believing in this project and bringing it to fruition today. And now I'd like to welcome to the podium the president of the John Templeton Foundation, Heather Dill. Under Dill's leadership, the John Templeton Foundation has funded a multitude of projects on research and discovery at the intersection of science and spirituality. Heather is also a parent and educator herself and knows firsthand the need for this sort of curriculum. So, welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Deb. It is wonderful to be part of this celebration today. Please join me in prayer. Creator God, in the beginning you created the heavens and the earth, and you gave us the heavens, the earth, and all the creatures on the earth to explore, to study, and to unlock the marvelous wonders of the created world. As we celebrate the launch of the Integrate curriculum, we are grateful for the minds that you give to all human beings. We are grateful for scientists, for science teachers, for those who teach religion, and for all those who want their students to engage with science in a meaningful way. And today we are especially grateful for BioLogos, the team members at BioLogos. We thank you for those who worked on the Integrate curriculum, for the teachers who asked for it and gave feedback, for the scholars that created these texts and reviewed different drafts to ensure that Integrate presented great science alongside deep questions of Christian faith and belief. Bless this good work, we pray. May it help those who engage with it to grow in their faith. May Integrate help those who are searching to find answers. And may this curriculum help those who need discussion and debate to find a place where questions can be asked in pursuit of a knowledge that we believe is found in you. We praise you because we are fearfully and wonderfully made. In you, all things hold together. You are the Lord of the heavens and the earth, and you are indeed the great creator of all that is and was and is still to come. Amen.
Thank you so much, Heather, for leading us in prayer. And now I'd like to introduce Philip Vischer. He is well known as the creator of Veggietales. He's a Christian filmmaker, animator, and voice actor. And he created Veggietales along with Mike Naraki. He provided the voice of Bob the Tomato. His series taught kids Bible stories, Christian values in a way that made them laugh and kept their parents laughing too. Today, Phil Vischer is the host of the Holy Post podcast and involved in many other projects, and he still cares deeply about the Bible, the church, and all our kids. He'll be our MC for the rest of this evening. So, welcome, Phil.
Hi, kids. I'm Bob the Tomato. I'm really happy to be here. I have enjoyed the BioLogos organization since it launched. I was a fan of Dr. Francis Collins even before he launched the organization. I am an evangelical Christian. My parents were evangelical Christians. My grandparents were evangelical Christians. My great-grandparents were evangelical Christians. We were definitely and have been for at least 4 generations on both sides of my family on the fundamentalist side of the modernist fundamentalist split in conservative Christianity in America. Not necessarily all the way to the Bob Jones end of the fundamentalist side, but not that far away. In fact, my mother has a memory when she was 6 or 7 years old of sitting on the couch in her grandfather's house, and on one side of her was Bob Jones Jr., and on the other side of her was Bob Jones Sr., who were coming to pay respect to my great-grandfather, who was the first non-denominational radio preacher in America. So we weren't necessarily Bob Jones fundamentalist, but we were just a few feet over on the couch. And so I grew up kind of we moved to Wheaton, Illinois when I was in middle school, and Wheaton, Illinois was the source of Billy Graham evangelicalism as opposed to Bob Jones fundamentalism, and so I kind of grew up in the tension between the two. And one of the things that I inherited from fundamentalism in Christianity was a fear of the world. Was the notion that I need to be careful because the world is out to get me. And I didn't want to listen to the world's music, so at a fairly young age, we started listening to Christian music. I started going to the Christian bookstore and buying my Christian music, and still some of my favorite music all the time I bought at the Christian bookstore back in the 1980s when I was in high school. I also, though, knew there was some tension between the Bible and science. And I remember also coming home from the Christian bookstore with a poster that I hung on my wall in high school that had a picture of all of these supposed missing links, the Piltdown man, the Java man, all of these missing link humans or humanoids that in many cases had been discovered to be frauds or were misreading of bones. And the point of the poster was, anyone who suggests we came from a monkey is foolish. And so I put that on my wall growing up so that I could stay clean from the world. But in high school, I loved science. In fact, going all the way back to third grade, in third grade, I read every book in our school library about space and space exploration and space travel. And then I got into physics in high school, and I loved physics, and I loved my physics book, and I loved that there was some math in the world of science. That was really fun. Then we got to biology, which I wasn't as wild about for 2 reasons. Number one, it involved sometimes cutting things open and looking inside of them. And they didn't smell good on the inside. And I didn't like anything about that. But the other thing that bothered me about biology is that I knew sooner or later we were going to hit that unit, the unit called evolution. And all I could think of about that unit was that's the unit that wants me to stop believing in God. So when I got to the unit of evolution in biology, I remember asking my mom, Mom, do we believe in evolution? And she was quiet for a bit and then said, I don't know. She was sort of moving in between the fundamentalism of her childhood and the neo-evangelicalism of Billy Graham and Wheaton College, but we weren't quite sure where we were in the middle. So I didn't know what to believe. I went to Wheaton College to the science building, and they have the Perry Mastodon in the Wheaton College Science Building, which has been there since the 1960s when it was unearthed by students who put it together as a display. And the plaque under the mastodon says, lived sometime about 20,000 years ago. And that really confused me because I had just kind of grown up as a kid saying, if you believe the Bible, you believe the world is 6,000 years old. And that's what we've always believed. And here is Wheaton College, at what point did they go liberal and stop believing the Bible? And then as I dug into it more, I realized, well, they actually never taught that the earth was young at Wheaton College, that there were different beliefs about science and how you interpret the Bible in different parts, not just of Christianity, but of evangelical Christianity. And to me, that was really encouraging to say, okay, I don't automatically have to reject all of this. I don't necessarily have to choose between the Bible and science, but I had to do this discovery on my own because there wasn't anything to help me with that. Then growing up later, I bumped into John Walton, the Old Testament scholar at Wheaton College, and some of his writing on Genesis, which was immensely helpful to say, not is the Bible answering the questions we ask today in Middle America, but it's answering the questions that the original audience were asking and the original author was answering. So how do we look at the world through the lens of the Bible in the time of the Bible? And that was such a fascinating thing. I thought I would maybe be more adventurous with some of the stuff I was doing for kids. So in one of my kids' videos, I made a Big Bang joke. Because the Big Bang was first suggested by a Catholic priest. The Vatican astronomer first suggested the Big Bang. And I remember one of a Christian, strong Christian family member, when she saw that joke in that video, said, why did you say that? And I said, well, why not? Why do you think it's a problem? And the answer was, well, because that's what scientists believe. And it was clear that there was a fairly large segment of my own tradition that said, if science believes it, I reject it. And we've seen that with COVID. We've seen that with climate change. We've seen that in all sorts of areas, this underlying mistrust of quote-unquote scientific expertise. Because, and we take it all the way back to the 1920s and the 1910s, they're out to turn us into atheists. So I have been trying in my very small way to say, hey kids, there's Christians in the sciences. And even the ones that aren't Christians aren't really all that interested in whether you're an atheist or not. They're trying to do good science. So can we bring science together with the Bible in a way that makes sense? And that's why I'm excited to be here today. I'm excited to be a part of this. I didn't write the curriculum, but I've looked over it and it looks really good. It might have more jokes if I'd written it, but it'd also probably be heretical at some point. So it's, it's all for the best. So now I want to introduce Dr. Catherine Applegate, who's the program director at BioLogos. Before she came to BioLogos, she was doing scientific training in computational cell biology. No big deal. Just, it's kind of like doing puppets. Computational cell biology. She co-authored the book, How I Changed My Mind About Evolution, with BioLogos Vice President Jim Stump. And over the past few years, she's been leading the development of the Integrate curriculum and is here to tell us a little bit about it. So, Catherine, come on up.
Thank you, Phil. Computational biology is a rich and exciting field that I hope you'll check out at some point. I am so pleased to be with you all today. This is a great moment for us as a team and for the community and all of the people who have spent time working on this curriculum. As Deb said, this is a long-time dream for BioLogos. Almost as soon as BioLogos began, we were already thinking about meeting the needs of Christian educators. And we had a series of conversations when I joined the staff a dozen years ago with Christian educators about really what their needs were for the science classroom. And both Christian school teachers as well as homeschoolers really said the same thing. They had great science curricula, but what they really needed was the way to make their faith connections for their students. And secular curricula are really strong on science. There's some really amazing science textbooks out there, but they don't help with this objective of faith integration. Unfortunately, a lot of Christian curricula that are out there are great for biblical integration. They present a Christian worldview, but sometimes are pretty weak on science. We have found that they typically take an attack or an avoidance tactic. They're either teaching kids to be defensive and skeptical of science and defend their faith against the claims of scientists, especially in those areas like age of the earth and evolution and climate change, they are taught to be defending their faith against those ideas. And the other tactic is avoidance. They will just not talk about those areas at all because they want to avoid those conflicts in the classroom. And at BioLogos, we think we need to lean into those hard questions. We need to look at the data and not be afraid of where that leads. And so we really want to model that for young people. And that was the spark or the genesis of the Integrate curriculum. Several years ago, we put together a team and we said, let's bridge that gap. We don't need to build a whole new science curriculum, but let's build a resource that can help foster those really important conversations as the students are encountering the science. This is so important to be doing this in high school, middle school and high school, before kids go off to college, because they need to learn this and encounter this before they get to a college classroom where they don't have a safe Christian adult to talk through it with. So Integrate is 15 unit studies. They're all available in digital format right now. We are working on a print version like this. And they walk you through the topics that you typically encounter in a high school biology course. So we have units that when you're studying nature of science, cells, genetics, ecology and evolution, we have units that kind of map alongside all of those topics. But what's really great is it's very flexible. So if you're in another natural science class or a Bible class, it's really easy to pick and choose the activities that kind of work alongside what you're teaching. And while we think this is especially useful for Christian schools and homeschoolers, we're also anticipating that ministry leaders, even just your average person in the pews who maybe it's been 20 years since you took a science class and you really want to figure out what's going on in the science and faith world. This is a great resource for just getting some background understanding and really inquiry-based teaching. I'm so proud of the team that we have. They have been the best to work with. You're going to hear from some of my co-authors today, but I also just want to point out, as Deb mentioned, that there were so many people. It really takes a village to put something like this together. And we had an amazing group of pilot teachers who gave their feedback. Sometimes they were working with drafts that didn't have answer keys or half-formed instructions. And when we look back now at what we've produced and we think what we gave them in the beginning to work with, it's kind of funny. But their feedback was so helpful and made it so much more user-friendly for the teacher and is going to be a lot more effective for student learning. So we're grateful to them. And we're also grateful to the many experts that shared their expertise to make it a really robust scientifically and theologically and pedagogically. So thank you to all of you who participated. I think probably 50 to 60 people had a hand in this curriculum. And finally, I just want to give a shout out to our publishing support team. Bracket Publishing has been great to work with. We also had various people helping in other ways, mapping the next-gen science standards and working with curriculum mapping in various ways. So we invite you to check out biologos.org to learn more about it. And we're gonna share with you a short little video to give you a sense of what some of the educators had to say.
One of the main reasons young people lose their faith when they go away to college is because of their difficulty in trying to put together these questions of faith that they have that science seems to contradict. Often, churches are fearful of exposing kids to science because it might rattle their faith. Actually, it's much more dangerous not to deal with these issues.
I think that can also be difficult for students if they're just told to accept and believe something as it is and not to fight for an answer for themselves.
I think we have to have a way that young people who are interested in science, whose faith is a rock on which they stand, have the opportunity to see how those things do fit together. And now, there's a way for that to happen.
Finding a curriculum that's written by scientists, educators, and theologians, and putting all that together so that it's good science, it's good theology, and it's good pedagogy. That's magic.
I think Integrate really fills in a gap of solid scientific education. from a Christian perspective. And it definitely doesn't dilute or dull down the Bible at all as well. Like both of those things are brought in full force.
Integrate was definitely open and go for us. The Integrate program just guided us through conversations that I already wanted to have, but I had no idea how to begin.
Integrate provides a lot of opportunities for students to engage with really difficult questions and very relevant topics too, with biblical references to really engage with these topics in a meaningful way.
I have seen students really light up and get excited about the discussion. Now I have students that can have this experience of, hey, we can read scripture and talk about it in science class, so that now I'm not creating an environment where it's one or the other.
Integrate was designed for Christian high school science teachers and Bible teachers, and also for homeschool parents.
Integrate is going to work for parents who want to have conversations with their children about faith and science, and who may not feel prepared at this moment to talk about certain ideas.
One of the things students want out of a science and faith conversation is to actually have the conversation.
I think it'll challenge students to not see their faith as something that just happens on Sunday or within their youth group, but it happens in the space of the classroom.
We need not be afraid that if we're reading God's Word and we're reading about God's works, which is nature, that they're going to be in collision. They're both God's truth.
Now we're going to meet Dr. Regina McCurdy, who is the Assistant Professor of Middle Grades and Secondary Education at Georgia Southern University, with her research focusing on culturally relevant pedagogy. If you thought you didn't understand what computational cell biology was, try to explain to me culturally relevant pedagogy, and on encouraging students from all backgrounds to see themselves as scientists. She's a lifelong follower of Christ, and she wants to tell a story about finding harmony between science and her faith for herself. So say hello to Regina McCurdy.
Thank you, Phil, for that introduction. Again, my name is Regina McCurdy, and I'm just going to share a little bit about my story, my background, my research that I'm doing, and why Integrate is needed. So a little bit about me. I was raised in Southern Baptist Church. My mother was and still is a woman of very strong faith. I learned about, Jesus, and I learned about Scripture and my love of God and the Bible. These were integral pieces of my upbringing and part of my faith. The church that I was raised in was very loving, very supportive, and all of the experiences that I had, Christian camp, Bible drills, all of the things as far as church, that was my life, and that was a strong part of it, and I'm so thankful for that aspect. But there was this other part of my life, too, that was very important, and that was science. I loved the study of DNA and genetics. I loved learning about the body. I, at one point, wanted to be a medical doctor. I loved learning about the natural world and cells and how they work. And as a person of faith, I felt that that was a way that I could honor God and see Him in creation. But, as others have mentioned before me, there was a conflict. In all of the Christian spaces that I was in, it was very clear that evolution was against God. It was not biblical. It was not something that I believed. And for a very long time, I ran away from it. I was in public school and high school and private school, and anytime the topic of evolution came up, I just sort of cringed inwardly in those public school science classes because I knew that I don't believe this. This is not of God. This isn't right, and I'm not going to be a part of it. Fast forward a little bit into college, I became a biology major because, as I mentioned, I wanted to be a doctor, so biology major made sense. And I was dreading the class that all biology majors had to take evolution. Sort of like the song, We Don't Talk About Bruno. We don't talk about evolution. That was something that I just ran from, and it was the last class I had to take in my semester before graduating. And I was very obstinate. I loved school. I loved getting good grades. So for me to not really study because I was, being very defiant and self-righteous, but I didn't know that at the time, was very unique for me. So I struggled in this class, and my father called me one time and said, Regina, stop trying to preach and get out of that class because you needed to graduate. So I stiffened up a little bit and had a chance to write a paper on bacteria and their resistance to antibiotics. And that's what got me an A, and I ended up that course with a C-, and I love that C- to this day. But I thought, my time with evolution was done. I don't need this anymore. Little did I know, I was going to become a teacher, and a science teacher at that. And I loved teaching, I loved science, but I also didn't like the fact that part of the curriculum in public school is to teach about natural selection and evolution. And I did as much as I possibly could to not go into it too much. I was just like, let's get this unit over with and get on to the fun stuff and stuff that I really want to teach about. I would help my students, I would give them the basic definition so that they're okay, taking a test, and then we're gonna move on. As this kept going, I realized that I was doing a disservice to my students, and how could I, a person of science, not be open enough to sort of understand. But truth be told, I didn't have any spaces where I felt comfortable having those types of conversations. And so I attended Northland Church, and I was listening to Pastor Joel C. Hunter, and he mentioned that God and science and faith, they don't have to be against each other. They can work in harmony together. He also mentioned Dr. Francis Collins as someone that he had known. And then he mentioned this thing called BioLogos, and I wrote it down. I was so dialed into that message. When I got home, I read everything I could on BioLogos' website, watched all the videos, all of those things, and started to instantly use those resources in my science teaching in a public 7th grade science class. I felt so much freedom after that because I was like, finally, some of those anxious thoughts and ideas I'd been having, there's a place where I can go and get some resource to learn about evolution, to learn about other aspects of science that, as a science teacher, I probably should know about. And I did my best to work through some of those questions that I was having. And one of the things that I noticed, even as an adult having this experience, is God is a God of grace, and he's a God of wanting you to bring your questions to him. And I think that that's something that was missing in some of my church spaces and community and my science spaces. I never really felt comfortable telling people of faith that I knew about the struggles I was having for the sake that they would think she's not really a Christian. And I also had the same with the areas of science. And what would they think? Well, you're supposed to be a person of science, not a person of faith. And so there was this dichotomy and this tension that I always felt until I saw this resource. How does this then look in the science classroom? So now I'm a science teacher educator, and I realize that a lot of what happens in the classroom is these boxes that I've placed all of these different puzzle pieces in. This sort of describes some of the identity crisis that some students feel. Part of my research is developing student science identity, and they come in with all these experiences from their background, their race, their ethnicity, and they come into the classroom and we're supposed to teach them about science, but a lot of times it doesn't have any connection to their real life and their everyday. A lot of times students do this. They look at their faith identity and they sort of keep it outside of the classroom. It never really comes in. And so when they're in the classroom, this is the only identity, that science that they're trying to work through. Other students, they bring it into the classroom, but you have this clash that's happening. And then they start to lose faith. They start to be challenged, and they're not sure what to do. The problem is some of the teachers don't have the resources, and they haven't had the resources to know how to deal with the faith in the science classroom. And this is where Integrate does such a beautiful job of creating what I would call a science relevancy bridge between the faith identity and the science identity. And that's a lot of a part of the research that I'm doing. So I'll just end with this story. Last semester I taught, and I'm still teaching, future teachers of science, whether elementary and middle school. So a lot of these students don't have a strong background in science. So we sort of teach them the basics. At the end of the semester, I asked them to reflect on a few different things, one of which, what have you learned? What science concepts do you think you'll best be able to understand and to teach now? This is what one of my Black female students said at the end of the semester. She said, some science concepts I feel a lot better about teaching is natural selection and evolution. I say this because when we were going over natural selection and evolution, you made sure to address our concerns about teaching our students about it. I was surely thankful for this discussion because prior to taking this class, I was very concerned as to how to teach evolution and natural selection without being biased due to my beliefs as a Christian. Now I know it is best that I try my best to educate my future students about natural selection and evolution because it is a part of science like any other topic. And I feel like now that we have Integrate, these types of conversations are more able to happen naturally with the support from the curriculum in the classroom so that these two do not come into conflict, but we actually see that they could be integrated together. So thank you for letting me share my story.
So we learned that you can bring your faith and science boxes into the classroom together. My question is, can you bring them onto an airplane? Was that in like the overhead storage, or did you have to check your boxes? Next, we have a chance to talk with some of the authors of the Integrate curriculum. We have Dr. April Cordero and Dr. Sarah Bodile? Rules. Bodile rule. I love it. So come on up here, guys. We need to talk about stuff. April is a member of the BioLogos board in addition to her day job as professor of biology and dean at Point Loma Nazarene University. You're the dean? One of the deans? I mean, you get to fire people?
I don't have that much power.
Oh, no? Okay. But you get to say what's right and wrong,
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, you're the source of morality.
Whether I'm allowed to or not.
For your department. Their research focuses on developing more effective approaches for teaching ecology and evolution to Christian students. That sounds fun. That's not sparky at all. Joining her is Sarah Bodile-Rolls. Thank you. An evolutionary biologist who trains faculty in effective teaching practices at the Colorado School of Mines. They still have that. That's still a thing. Are you involved in mining in any way?
Mining engineering is one of our departments.
That's fantastic. Are you the dean?
I am not the dean.
Oh, that's
I
too
do
bad.
not have those types of powers either.
Fun fact, Sarah knows every North American bird call. That's not true.
That is true, actually.
She also races pack burros in her free time.
I do.
Yes, that's a thing. Donkeys under load, you running
with them.
With the donkeys.
On a lead rope.
On a rope up a mountain.
Mm-hmm. And back, most of the time.
And back. Because if there's two things we know about humans, we love to discover and invent things, and then once we've done that, we love to race them.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Yours, everybody has a water buffalo. Yours is fast, and mine is slow. Okay, sorry about that. Completely a diversion. So you guys were involved in designing the curriculum. Where on earth did you start? You know, no big deal. How did it start?
Well, that is an excellent question,
Thank
Phil,
you.
because we started with the big questions. As others were saying...
How do we design a curriculum?
Right. As others were saying, we wanted to make this both a rigorous science and faith curriculum. And so we started with those big questions where Christians who are struggling to integrate their faith and science always run into. So immediately what comes to mind, things like evolution, climate change, technology, specifically things like genetic and DNA technologies, stewardship of the earth. Do we take care of the earth first or people first? And all of those big areas. Once we had our list of questions, we could organize each unit around one of those central questions. It's engaging for people, and it also shows you how you can bring in your personal faith and science to address the question. From there, once we had the big questions and all of our kind of unit packages outlined, we were able to do a technique that's really common in educational design and even product design for engineering called backwards design. So you start with what your overall goals are. You're able to look at those questions and say, what types of knowledge and skills do students need to understand and know how to do in order to tackle those big questions? And that gives you the layout of your unit. So as we are creating these learning sequences within the units that would help equip students to answer those big questions, or at least start wrapping their minds around those big questions, we were able to bring in our expertise as pedagogical folks, kind of like Regina, to be able to add effective teaching strategies to both assist teachers in bringing that type of material to the students and have students be actively engaged, working on discussions, having open space for their own questions, their own doubts, their own curiosities, and package that all together with some of the best of the learning sciences that we have. And from there, we also wanted to make sure that teachers were not bound to a very specific sequence. We built an overarching sequence to answer those big questions, but it's also a very flexible curriculum. So modules within units are able to be pulled out to address specific objectives that teachers may have that would work best for their students and their context. So that's kind of an overview of the big picture design of these units.
How long did that take?
Well, it's been 5 years, and I don't think we're entirely done.
Okay.
So
Okay, that's exciting.
Some time,
Okay.
lots of great discussions.
So the Integrate curriculum is a science and faith curriculum.
Yes.
As we've established today, those are two different boxes. So how do you bring them together? It's called Integrate, the curriculum, right?
It is.
So I guess that's the goal.
Yes, to integrate them and so
How'd you
that
do it?
students don't see them as separate.
Right.
Well, we've got the 15 units based on a variety of different biology topics that you would encounter in a regular high school biology class. And then within any one unit, we have particular components. We call them modules. So each and every unit has a meat module where the student will watch a 2-minute or so video of a Christian scholar.
Is that M-E-E-T or M-E-A-T?
Oh, it's an EE.
Okay, that's good.
Definitely an EE.
Okay.
And they will be introduced to a Christian scholar, a Christian scientist, a theologian. And that person in the video will be describing how they integrate science and their faith. And there's some discussion questions and such for the teacher to engage the students with. In each one of our units, we also have a grow module. And this is a lot like a devotional, where we've picked a Christian virtue, let's say intellectual humility, and we focus on that, and there's Bible verses, and there's reflection questions, and we engage in that. Each unit ends with something called Integrate, where they are asked a very provocative or generative question that's difficult, and they've got an opportunity, having completed that unit, to bring in their understanding of the science and their faith together to address that particular question. And then in the midst of all that, we have some things called Experience and Engage, where they're doing some hands-on activities that supplement the regular biology curriculum. And then some Engage, where they're doing some theological interpretation and reading the Bible and discussing the challenges of that and how things have changed over time. And really the goal is to have the students do the thinking and the reasoning and the wrestling and the enjoyment and excitement of figuring out how to bring these two initially separate topics together in their own lives, so that when they're done with the unit, they sort of own it.
Right. Do they ever have to cut apart anything smelly?
They do not have to cut apart anything smelly.
Where was this curriculum when I was in high school?
Now, their parent or their teacher might make them cut apart something, but it's not in our curriculum.
Okay. I can't cut apart anything smellier than a Twinkie. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You've told us a lot. Okay, next up, you guys get out of here, take your masks, pack up your burro, hit the road. Next up, we'll be talking with Integrate authors Christy Hemphill and Kendra Terpstruck. Christy was a classroom teacher before becoming a linguistic consultant on a minority language scripture translation project in southern Mexico. Yeah, I did that once too. Where she homeschools her 3 kids. Kendra taught English at a large urban high school in Michigan before becoming a homeschool mom to her 3 kids. So, okay, you can take your mask off now. You are okay. I understand, so you both got involved with Integrate out of the necessity of finding good teaching resources to use with your own kids. So what motivated each of you specifically to jump in and get involved?
Okay, if you insist. I had students, like my children, who were very interested in science. And so I knew that I didn't want to present science to them the way it had been presented to me, where it was sort of this conflict idea. But I knew I didn't know enough to make good decisions. So I sought out people who were scientists and said, what do I use? And they pointed me toward BioLogos. And then I kept harassing them for materials that didn't exist yet, and so I got roped into helping create them.
There you go. If you request something too much, you have to make it. And what about you?
I would say my story is very similar. I have very curious, inquiring children and that would be asking me huge questions, like my 5-year-old saying, is it okay to doubt God? Or my 7-year-old daughter, are Adam and Eve real people? I felt very under-equipped. So like Christy, I reached out to BioLogos. I researched and found that there was really not a whole lot available to parents like us who have kids who are very inquisitive. And so, within a few years of deciding that there wasn't anything out there, I got a call from Catherine Applegate, who said, do you want to be a part of this project? And of course, if you complain enough about something not existing, you do have to be a part of creating it.
The squeaky wheel has to change the flat tire.
To be part of the solution.
Yeah, part of the solution. It was an invitation to be part of the solution.
Yeah, which was exciting.
Yeah. All right. And you enjoyed it? It was fun?
Very much so. I have a real passion for the homeschooling community. Right. I know that my kids are not unique and that there are a lot of other kids out there who feel, who are asking big questions to their parents as well. And there's not a lot available within the homeschooling world of curricula. And so I was like, well, if I need this, I know there are other parents who need this. And so that was a huge drive for me to be able to help those parents do what I wanted to do as well.
Right. So what do you hope happens? How do you hope this affects the lives of students?
Well, I am excited about the idea of the next generation being able to look at role models that they can identify that are scientists and say, I want to be like them. I see a path that I might take. For my own kids, I have 2 that are kind of oriented towards STEM subjects, and it's nice to be able to encourage them that this is a God-given love and that it's not something that they need to squash because good Christians fight science. I think Kendra and I have both noticed in the homeschooling community, there's often, I was talking to another parent, and she said, I just feel like of all the subjects, science is most the tool of Satan. And that attitude that science is something that we need to be on guard against, that it's something that is used to pull us away from God is not something I want my kids to pick up on. And I know there are a lot of teachers that don't want their students to pick up on that from their communities. You can teach your kids something at home, but they're out in their friends and their Sunday school class and their camps and everything else, they might get different messages. So I think we're both excited about this idea that we can help our kids encounter some of these ideas that they may be getting from their more Christian communities and have answers to them, and not do it in this confrontational, we're going to debate and we're going to destroy your ideological opponent kind of way, but in a let's talk about this, let's think about this. We're not afraid of questions. We can be gracious to people with different ideas. Christians can approach things different ways.
There's so much of a drive in much of conservative Christianity where I grew up towards certainty. I have to be certain about everything.
Yes.
And so when even my mother telling me when I asked her about evolution, can we believe it or not? She said, I don't know. Even that was a gift to me to say, we don't have to have this all figured out. We can go on a journey to learn about it together.
Yeah.
We homeschooled one of our kids for a year, and so we started getting the catalogs of homeschooling curriculum. I remember the first catalog that came in the mail had a big sticker on the front that said 100% evolution free. That there would be no piece of curriculum in the entire catalog that would even mention evolution.
Yeah.
And then when you learn, well, Billy Graham didn't have a problem with evolution, and he's kind of a big deal in the evangelical world. How did this happen, and how do we undo this false dichotomy?
Well, there's a whole community of people interested in it, but we found people feel very isolated and alone, like no one thinks like me. The kids feel like nobody else's parents have these crazy ideas that faith and science can be integrated. So we're trying to pull together a community of people.
Yes, and create that support. And I think too, just helping our kids think critically about these things. Not just always getting the answers from mom and dad, but having this material that helps, walks them through some of those big questions, and that gets them thinking. And sometimes they do land on, I don't know. And other times, I had a mom who piloted, and she was an evolutionary creationist, but her son was a young earth creationist. And her objective was not to change his mind, but it was to get him thinking about why he believed what he believed, and then presenting another view. And it really, I think there were a couple things that he changed his mind on, but he still was kind of firm, like, I need more. But it was really a neat way of showing how Integrate can work within a family setting. And it really encourages gracious dialogue. Like, we encourage kids, once they've gone through a unit, to go out into their communities, go into their churches, their youth groups, their co-ops, and engage in a gracious way instead of a combative way. And I love that part of it.
That's fantastic. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.
And at the very least, they will learn that the devil doesn't use science, he uses calculus. So, there's one more member of the author team who couldn't be here today. Diane Sweeney is an AP biology instructor and department head at Sacred Heart Preparatory in Atherton, California, and she wrote labs for the biology textbook program, Biology Exploring Life. And Diane, we're sorry you couldn't be here. Okay, the last person we're going to meet, if you enjoyed the New Atheist movement of the early 2000s as much as I did, you probably were required by one of your friends to read Richard Dawkins at some point or another. And I remember reading Richard Dawkins to see how I would lose my faith in 10 pages or less. And I didn't lose my faith, but I found it interesting that when he was asked, why are there no Christian scientists? And he said, well, of course there are no serious scientists that are Christian. And then he paused and said, well, except for Francis Collins. And it just made like a whole bunch of people sit up and say, wait, who's this Francis Collins? This must be an interesting guy if even Richard Dawkins says, well, okay, he's the unicorn. So Francis Collins doesn't really need an introduction. Everyone in the BioLogos community knows him. He led but I've got one. I've got one anyway, so we're going to introduce him. He led the Human Genome Project before serving as director of the NIH for 12 years under 3 different and very different presidents. He launched BioLogos in 2009 upon the success of his book, The Language of God, in which he told the story of his journey from atheism to Christian belief. He's been awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the National Medal of Science, my favorite science teacher award from his 3rd grade class. In 2020, he was elected as a foreign member of the Royal Society. Does that mean you can talk in a British accent? No. Oh, that's too bad. And was also named the 50th winner of the Templeton Prize, which celebrates scientific and spiritual curiosity. So here's my buddy, Dr. Francis Collins.
Well, thank you, Phil, for being such a wonderful MC for this particular launch of the Integrate curriculum. And a special thanks to Catherine Applegate and all of the amazing people who created and tested this curriculum that I am so excited about. This is in many ways the dream come true that's been around us now for 4 or 5 years as we have been recognizing the real need that exists out there in schools to have information that brings together rigorous science and Christ-centered faith in a way that actually shows young people how those can fit together, not in a way that causes conflict, which is what a lot of people still believe, but actually a way that creates harmony, that inspires. And that's what Integrate is all about. Imagine that you're a young person right now looking at what's going on in science. You got to be excited. We have the James Webb Telescope up there that is going to tell us things about galaxies that were too far away to be seen, and now we can see them. It's going to tell us things about exoplanets, other stars that have planets around them too. And we have all the things that are happening in engineering, in physics. For me as a life scientist, oh my gosh, this is like the golden era. We are figuring out things like, how does the brain actually work? And we're bringing to bear all kinds of technologies that are going to cure terrible diseases that used to be things we had nothing to offer for, gene therapy for sickle cell disease, and lots of other things we're going to learn in the coming decades. And to be part of that, what young person who's interested in science isn't going to feel excited about that? But if you're a Christian homeschooler or a Christian high school student and you're excited about science, you might also be feeling a little uncomfortable, like, if I get really into this, is that going to threaten my faith? Because that might be a message that you had heard. Integrate exists to try to provide that reassurance that you can do all of this. You can both pursue the most rigorous science about how nature works, and you can also lean upon, stand upon that foundation of faith that has anchored you from the beginning. That's what BioLogos is all about, bringing together the spiritual and the scientific worldview, showing that they are in fact complementary and not in conflict. As Francis Bacon famously wrote, God gave us 2 books, the book of God's words, the Bible, and the book of God's works, which is nature. And science gets to read the one about nature, and all of us get to read the one about God's words in the Bible. And if they're both God's books, they couldn't very well be in conflict. And that's what BioLogos is all about, God's word, God's world. But again, I'm not sure that in many high schools that are still worried about whether science is going to threaten the faith of the students, or in homeschools, that this is a comfortable space. There just hasn't been the kind of material there that they needed. And maybe they have still worried that there is a problem that can't be solved. I didn't grow up in a faith tradition. I was an atheist in graduate school. I came to faith as a medical student. I was already deeply into science, particularly the science of DNA, and people said, well, that isn't going to work. Your faith and your science are going to collide. And you know what? It never did. I have seen no example of any sort where my scientific interests and my faith commitments don't figure out how to manage quite nicely and harmoniously together. In fact, I think of science as more than just a secular activity. It's also a way of getting a glimpse of God's mind. If everything we're studying in nature is God's creation, we have this privilege of being able to use the tools to understand how it works. In that way, the laboratory is not just a room with a bunch of equipment, it's kind of a cathedral. We're kind of there to worship. And when we learn something new that nobody knew before, that is the same kind of experience one might have when you're praising the Lord in a church, because it's all about that kind of discovery. But we need to be sure that that same experience is appreciated and even widely felt by this next generation, because we need them. They're going to be our leaders. And we want to have Christians at the table, in the lab, in the clinic, making that next set of great discoveries that we know are there. We want them to be empowered and inspired, not troubled by science. We want them to see that a career in science is a way of serving both humanity and serving God. And we want them to experience how, indeed, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. That is how science and faith, down through the centuries, has been experienced by many of us, and we want it to be experienced by this next generation. There has been a gap. There hasn't been the kind of material there to help with that. Integrate steps into that gap now with materials that have been very carefully thought through, designed, tested, to provide the way to bring together Christ-centered faith and rigorous science. And we're delighted that homeschoolers and Christian high schools are now going to have the chance to see how this can help so that they provide students with this full experience of the knowledge both of God and of nature. And the time has come for that launch to happen, and we're thrilled that it's happening today. So, without further ado, let me invite back up to the stage the guy who has helped us have this whole experience this afternoon go both with content and good humor. Phil Vischer.
All right, this is a little song. This is a little something that Dr. Collins and I worked up in the subway. We were busking in the subway back in 1985.
Yeah, we made, I think, 39 cents, but that was a pretty good day for us, actually.
It was enough to get you into medical school. I'm here with Francis Collins. He mapped the human genome.
I'm here with Philip Vischer. He made the tomatoes talk.
This is true. I'm here with Francis Collins. He's a New York Times bestselling author, and he led the fight against the coronavirus, and he was awarded the National Medal of Science and the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Well, I'm here with Philip Vischer. He did that thing with the tomato, and something about vegetables that had tails.
That's all you got about me?
Oh, give me a break. You know, I've been in the lab and running projects for about science for 30 years, and my kids are kind of grown up, so what else? You've made some discoveries or something?
No, actually, let's just stick with the tomato thing. I made cucumbers talk too.
Okay.
Does that count for?
That works.
That counts for something? Yeah. Okay. We're here today because we both like science and love God.
And we don't think the Christian faith and science are at odds.
To teach the children well doesn't mean we have to tell them that the Bible isn't true or that science has it out for you.
We don't think we're mistaken if we quote from Francis Bacon, who said God has given 2 great books, so open book and take a look
at Scripture and at nature, so we can celebrate your grand design.
Why, it's divine!
And we will find God has a mind, and faith and science just don't have to be at war. And that's what he and I have come here for.
I'm here with Philip Vischer. He did something with tomatoes.
I'm here with Francis Collins. He created the coronavirus in a bathtub with Bill Gates so they could implant us all with microchips and control our brains and take away our freedoms. Freedom!
Bill.
What?
None of that is true.
But I read it on Facebook.
You can't believe everything you read on social media.
You mean you're not married to Kim Kardashian?
No, I am not.
Well, if I can't believe social media, if I can't trust social media, who can I trust?
We trust God and His Word.
And study nature, or so I've heard.
And together faith and science make us cheer.